Hello and welcome to the Hessian Scrum podcast. Today, joining us is a very esteemed guest. We have Chang, formerly of Gridlink and Discordance Axis. You know, Gridlink, who recently released one of the better albums of this year by far, Coronet Juniper. So, thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me.
Talk about a comeback that came out of nowhere, for a project that was supposed to be dead, really. It's insane.
Um, well, the it was not so much a comeback as a it sort of just happened naturally. We weren't planning to do another record, and Hydra. Assuming you're familiar with Hydra Head, Hydra Head had originally put out the first two Gridlink records. They had the Discordance Access catalog. They put out the Hayaino Daisuki records, and Gridlink. Hydra Head had sort of been in a weird state for a couple of years where like the two owners of the label were planning to dissolve the label, and they finally dissolved the label. And at that point, Aaron Turner, who is the sort of primary owner of the company, decided to return all the rights of the music to the artists. They had always been really fair about working with us and said, they didn't ask for publishing, they didn't ask for any mechanicals, which is for those people who don't know, that's how bands make a lot of their money. So anytime somebody watches a song on YouTube or plays a song on Spotify or whatever the format is, like whatever they stream their music on, the artists get a royalty based on the mechanicals and the publishing rights. So Hydra Head had never asked for any of that, but basically what they did have is a partial ownership of the recordings, and they essentially released all of that to us and said, hey, feel free to shop this to whoever you want to. Rob Martin and I had gotten back together and done the sort of one-shot record in, I think it was 2018, the No One Knows What the Dead Think record, which was just kind of more Rob Martin. Like he wrote the whole thing. I did the vocals and the lyrics. The artwork concept was his, which is kind of unusual for most of the records I work on. But like it was very much like a Rob Martin complete, like unhindered Rob Martin experience, right? And Willow Tip had put that out, and I'm trying to remember how I think it was Mitch from Maruda had connected us, and Tipton, the owner of Willow Tip, was very excited about the No One Knows What the Dead Think record. He was happy with it when it came out. It's not like a blockbuster record, right? It's a grindcore record or like metal record or whatever. But it was the first record either of us had done in years, and it wasn't exactly like we didn't like go gangbusters on PR. We didn't want to do interviews. So it did okay, but when when we had the Discordance Access catalog and the Gridlink catalog and the Daisuki catalog, I went to him. I said, "Hey, do you want these?" And he said yes. So we started reissuing the Discordance Access records because I believe they had been out of print for many years. I mean, in all honesty, I don't think any of the members of the band really keep their fingers on the pulse of how often these things are brought back into print or when they sell out. That cycle is not where like that's not my job anymore. That's why you have a record label. But we did the Inalienable Dreamless, and I believe we did Joho, and then he started talking about reissuing the Gridlink records because Amber Gray and Orphan had been out of print for at least 10 years. And the idea, I talked to Takafumi about it. I was still in contact with him. He had other bands he was doing. He recovered from his stroke and was doing a lot of like smaller, what he would call like simpler grindcore bands. And he said, well, let me write some bonus tracks for it, right? Let's write like 3 or 4 songs that could be like, so it's an expanded edition, right? Like it's something more. So you're not just buying the same music exactly again, right? If you're a collector. And so he wrote like 2 or 3 songs to start with. And they were good enough that I said, well, would you be interested in doing a whole new record? And he was very excited about the prospect, but honestly, I hadn't talked to Brian in maybe 8 or 9 years since. It's the kind of thing, man. Like COVID happened, so there were 3 or 4 years where nobody really saw each other at all. I'm not like really into personally. I'm not really into conventional modern grindcore, and where while Brian is probably the best in the business at that, it's just not a genre I'm spending a lot of time listening to. So I don't go to a lot of like live performances. But basically, I think it was Pretty Little Flower was who was playing in Philadelphia, which is where I live, and so I got to go see him, and we discussed we talked, getting along okay. So we said, hey, what about the possibility of doing a new record? He said, yeah, sure, I'm in. Um, and then we decided that Ted was not going to be invited back into the band, and Morrow from Maruda. It's a lot of Maruda connections here. Morrow we was suggested. I'm not sure who suggested him. I think actually Mitch suggested we talk to Morrow about playing bass because I thought Morrow was a guitar player, and Morrow was interested, and that was the new Gridlink lineup. Basically, we flushed it out over the course of like basically 2 months. It was also nice because Takafumi and Brian were both acquainted with Morrow and both friends with him. So, you had a chemistry already, which was great. And Takafumi basically just writes all the songs, and I would write lyrics to the guitar tracks I got, and Brian would do his drum stuff on his own, and Mo would do the same thing with his bass tracks. And we got to, I think it was like 11 songs on that record. We might have had 12 at one point, but we cut one. And we said, okay, this is an album. And we talked to Willowtip about releasing it, and they listened to some of the demo tracks, and they were like, absolutely, let's do it. And they funded the recording, and that is what allowed us to do the live show in February earlier 2023, which was the Long Henna show, because we'd actually never played Long Henna live in the U.S. We as a band, we dissolved in 2013 after we recorded Long Henna, and Long Henna was actually mostly recorded in Japan. The only thing that wasn't done in Japan was the vocals, and the mix was done in the United States. And basically the same engineer who did that would be the guy who worked on No One Knows What the Dead Think. He was the one who worked on the a forthcoming Discord and Saxus Ulterior remix, and he's also working on a couple of other we're remixing Orphan and Amber Gray for their re-release on not Hydrahead, on Willowtip, and he was the one who ended up recording this record as well. So it was all people who had basically worked together on and off for about a decade, not directly, but in turn, if you will. So that's basically how the record happened. Like, there was no plan to make a Gridlink reunion. Like, there wasn't like, oh, it's a 20th anniversary, we're coming back. It wasn't anything of that nature. And in fact, there was potentially an interest in carrying on beyond Coronet Juniper from I know Takafumi wanted to continue going. And for me at my age and like what I'm doing in my life, it's not really possible for me to go forward with a band and like give it the effort it requires to do the quality I want. And Brian had no shortage of other bands that he was still doing. So I believe actually Takafumi and Brian are working on a new band right now. I not 100% of that, but like I'm pretty sure Takafumi has signaled to me he's working on new material. He was already working on new material when Coronet Juniper was before it had come out yet. He'd already started working on yet another record. And I think he is also conversing with like Morrow and potentially Rory, who is our session guitar player essentially for our live shows, about coming in and being part of this new band. So I think the rest of the guys are planning to go forward. I'm not in a place in my life where I'm really able to continue doing that. Certainly not as a full time. Like I have like a lot of responsibilities. I run several small companies, and it was a massive effort for me to even do Coronet Juniper, let alone to try to, be in a grindcore band, which isn't exactly a particularly lucrative form of music.
But it's really funny in that Long Henna was very melancholic and sorrowful, in a way that we've never heard in a grindcore album, right? And it was just like this kind of beautiful swan song. And then on the other hand, Coronet Juniper is like the opposite. It's oddly triumphant.
I'm not sure if it was you who said that to me. I've heard that once or twice before. I don't necessarily feel that way. The music. Well, I mean, first of all, really, it's Takafumi's music, right? He's the one who wrote all the guitar, so I can see why it would have that that sensibility, because we all knew Long Henna was going to be the end of Gridlink. We weren't planning to do another record after that. That was basically going to be it. Like my work schedule at that time was so intense that I was not going to be able to continue doing a band. And honestly, like there's a lot of dynamics in being in a band, or working with other artists, that there's obviously going to be friction and different ideas that happen. And I was kind of at a point in my life where I didn't care about that anymore. I didn't need to work through that. Like I felt like there were good ideas, and I didn't want to. I was kind of tired with fighting with people over what I thought was like the right answer, because I sort of creatively in my professional career gotten to a place where I didn't have to do that anymore, which was quite nice. Like there, and again, people who are in bands who have ideas, I'm sure they all feel the same way, right? And I'm sure that the other guys in the band felt the same way. Like, why are they arguing with me about this shit? We've all been in a band together for 10 years. It's not like anybody is not capable of writing good music, or but it's just people growing apart, right? Like it's artists growing apart, growing up, and having different ideas and different things that are important to them. But I think that the triumphant stuff you're hearing, maybe the fact that Takafumi was so excited to come back and do a record like a Gridlink record again. But the funny thing is that after we finished Coronet Juniper, the new record he was writing, he wanted to go back to more of like the Amber Gray sound, like the original sound, which is kind of like, super fast Slayer. So it's kind of very aggressive, very dark, maybe not quite as nuanced as the newer stuff. And I don't actually hear Coronet Juniper as triumphant, and that's maybe because I wasn't planning to do another record with the band. So for me, it's kind of like not an epilogue, because it's its own thing, but it just continues a lot of the same themes from the earlier records. And yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's a lot darker than Long Henna. Long Hennas are pretty dark. I mean, all of the Gridlink records are pretty dark. They're not nothing on those records is about like good times and happiness. I mean, it's not really the genre for it. So, but yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that Coronet Juniper is almost a power metal record. I mean, there's people who feel the need to comment and say, online, like, I mean, I guess I was that way 1.2, too, but like I got to go in the comment thread and say that this isn't grindcore, because I don't believe in my heart that this band is grindcore. They're screamo, or they're math rock, or they're fill in the blank. And like this, like for me, I see that and I'm like, youth. Like, don't you have anything better to do? Like, really. But I mean, I get it. I was that guy at 1.2. Like, I was passionate about the art form, and I was so passionate that, like, it was very easy to get angry about things that probably weren't worth getting angry about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but Gridlink style it's so unique because in many ways, if we can trace grindcore's entirety from Napalm Death, Gridlink does slip through the cracks. It's definitely grindcore, but it's not. But it's completely unlike anything we've ever heard.
Yeah, no, I get that, man. I get that. I think that's by design. I mean, this is one of the big sources of creative friction in the band, right? Like myself and Takafumi met in 2001 in the last Discordance Access Japan tour, and his band Mortalized, they opened for Discordance in Osaka. Absolutely loved them. They were like one of the bands of the tour for me. Like, I was completely blown away when I saw them play. I mean, they were like the fastest, craziest thing I'd heard in a while, and I was super excited about them. I started writing to him, and what we started writing about was not grindcore. We wrote about heavy metal. Like, Hayaino Daisuki was actually the first band we started together. Gridlink was another band. It didn't have a name yet, but he was doing that with two other people, and they asked me to sing on it when I started doing Hayaino Daisuki. Like, my connection with Takafumi, what interested me about working with him, we both like Japanese heavy metal. Like, that was our connecting point. So that was a big point of estrangement for other people who tried to work with us, because Japanese heavy metal is its own vibe, right? Like, it's different than Western heavy metal. Like, basically Deep Purple and Rainbow are the things that influence all modern Japanese heavy metal, right? Like that whole setup with the keyboard player, the bass player, the guitar player, the singer, and the drummer. That's basically what I was really interested in, right? Like bands like Galnerius was a big band me and Takafumi liked. We both really liked oh god, I could go on. Anthem. There's all these like, these like heavy metal hard rock bands for all intents and purposes, and that's more what I was interested in. Like I really liked how black metal brought in like a layer of emotion to fast music that hadn't been there before, and that's why I really got into black metal in general in, I don't know, like early 2000s. It's like, oh, this is the fastest thing out there, and there's more interesting things happening in this style of music than anything else, because they're doing it really fast and they're infusing all of this different emotion into it. And that was actually what I was looking for, right? Like, because when Napalm first came out, Napalm was just overwhelming, like uncontrolled emotion. Like when I think about listening to earlier Napalm Death, I think about like just this explosion of energy, and like that's how I felt when I was in high school, or when I was in junior high school. I think I first heard Napalm Death. I can't remember if it was the Peel Sessions or From Enslavement. I'm sure I've said it at some point before. It was one of those two. I remember buying the cassette of From Enslavement to Obliteration at a record store in a city called New Brunswick when I was in I was in high school. I think I was in ninth grade. It was like 1986 or 87 when it came out, and I remember buying it, and it had like, it had like 28 songs on it or 26 songs on it, and the people at the store actually were making fun of me for buying the record. And they're like, 28 songs on a cassette, dude, what is this, like orchestra? It was like a big joke, right? Because nothing else existed like that. And the Peel Sessions, I remember when people would hear the Peel Sessions, they're like, how many songs was that in 6 minutes? And I forget, it was like 14 songs in 6 minutes for the first Peel Sessions. It's just like completely unhinged, and it's totally noisy. You can barely hear the guitar. It's just like bass and crash cymbals and blast beats and screaming. And that's what I was like. I was looking for that edge, right? Like the beginning of Angel of Death comprised into an entire record, right? Like, can you take that opening bar of Angel of Death and collapse it into like 20 seconds? There you go. That's what I want, right? Like the screaming, the really fast bass work, the really fast drums, everything as fast as possible and as intense as possible. So yeah. It's a different starting point from where we ended up doing Gridlink, because Gridlink was really coming from heavy metal. Like, Hayaino Daisuki is what we wanted to do. Gridlink over time became Hayaino Daisuki because people did not understand Hayaino Daisuki. Like, they didn't understand it was supposed to be a fun heavy metal band, and it went over everybody's head. Like, people didn't realize what it was, they didn't get it, or they weren't interested in it. I mean, maybe more accurately, maybe it just wasn't people's thing, right? So Orphan, when we were playing Orphan brings in a lot of these melodic elements. You can't hear them as well in the mix because we didn't really know what we were doing yet. We were still trying to figure out what the sound was. Long Henna, we actually layered all of that stuff in there from the get-go, so I kind of knew where we were going with it. And that, like ideas on Long Henna, like the violin piece, we wanted to do pieces like that on Orphan, like with like piano and blast beats, but Brian didn't like the idea, didn't like how it sounded, and so we didn't include them in the record. With Long Henna, when the band was broken up, I cared less about people's feelings, so I just kind of did what I wanted. I just like, okay, I'm just gonna go do this. Let's have, and Takafumi really liked the idea, and the violinist on that piece, Joey Molinaro, he had been a friend. He had done a Discordance Access violin interpretation that was really cool. I'd seen him play it at a basement show at some point. And I was like, man, this guy's got passion. He's got talent. He's really incredible musician. And so I invited him to work on the record, right? Like, I asked Paul Pavlovich from ASSUC, who had been an old friend of mine, to sing on the record too. Not thinking he was going to do it, but like being super excited that he did. Because that was the ASSUC. ASSUC's a funny band, right? Because like ASSUC was like kind of the first, even though there were other American grindcore bands before ASSUC was the first grindcore band that picked up any steam, right? Like, people heard ASSUC and it was like, oh, I get it, right? Like their Anti-Capital record was, I don't know, like I think 17 or 18 songs in like 15 minutes or something like that. And I remember when it came out, how into that record I was. I was completely bananas about that record. I haven't listened to Asuk in probably, I can't even remember the last time I listened to Asuk. I don't even know if I have their CDs anymore because I had the Sound Pollution ones when they had come out. But I think I stopped listening to them. I mean, it's funny because I'm still friends with several of the guys who were in Asuk, but based on how that band kind of fell apart in my relationship with some of the people in the band, I can't really listen to their music anymore because it's kind of like tainted by uh like the personal stuff that was going on in that group. Because again, when people are your friends, bad breakups have a different effect on you than they will people who don't know what's going on, or even if they do know what's going on, if they're not personally connected and watching the people involved get hurt, it obviously changes your perception of like not just the music but like the meaning of the music.
Hmm.
Sorry, that was a very I tend to give long-winded answers. Phil, you'll probably need to edit a lot of this crap.
Nah, I think I'm gonna keep it as is because it's great. But you know what? In all these projects that all you guys have been a part of, everything from Discordance Axis to Moralized and everything, there's this kind of common factor of like short songs that feel complete with a lot of melody, but still maintain that furiousness, which is kind of funny. Considering like bands from Japan and America and guys who are very who aren't really connected, but it seems like there's that kind of running theme through everything around the kind of Gridlink universe.
Well, I mean, Gridlink and Discordance, no one knows. Hayaino and Daisuki, these are all very different sounding bands, right? And they're all like, Discordance Discordance and No One Knows is me and Rob. But Rob doesn't really have a connection to Takafumi other than, he had dinner with him one time when we were recording one of the Gridlink records. And Takafumi really loved, like, it's funny because Takafumi's favorite Discordance record is Joho. That's the one that he loves, not Any Level Dreamless, which is typically the one that most people tend to like if they're gonna like, like the definitive Discordance record is the Inalienable Dreamless. But for Takafumi, it was always Joho. Which kind of meshes with the fact that if you go back and listen to Amber Gray, there's definitely a lot more Joho in Amber Gray than there is the Inalienable Dreamless, right? But like Discordance Access as a sound, I think had a much bigger impact in Japan because they understood the music better than the American audience. I mean, you go back and Discordance Access was not a popular band in the United States. Like we really weren't. We played a bunch of shows at CB's with other artists, and collectively we were able to enjoy audiences actually coming to the shows. But honestly, I mean, there were so many Discordance shows that literally nobody showed up. It was literally it was the band and the promoters of the other bands, and as a result, we didn't really play in the U.S. very often because there just wasn't much of an audience for us here. Like most of our records sold overseas. We didn't have a whole lot of sales in the States, and the sort of like the ideas and the artwork really resonated with the Japanese audiences specifically. The U.S. audiences were far less receptive, and I mean, I'll occasionally go back, and I remember some of the initial reviews for the Inalienable Dreamless. They really weren't favorable. Like they weren't nice. I saw people later go back and rewrite some of their interviews to be a little bit more favorable. But just generally speaking, we weren't exactly like a hot band. I mean, we weren't part of the scene. Like Dave had some relationships. Like he went, he knew people, so there was the social aspect of like getting people to come to the shows. But really, like myself and Rob were, we didn't really have any connection to the social circles of the music. So like we wouldn't have had any shows if we didn't have a label or a guy who liked us. Like Ralphie from Disassociate used to promote all of the grindcore shows in New York City. And without Ralphie, there really wouldn't have been any of these shows. He was the one who got the CBGB's matinees to go, and he brought all kinds of different like bands to play at those shows. But they weren't like hit shows. Like they weren't sold out most of the time. You know what I mean? It wasn't like wasn't like grindcore was this like there wasn't like a movement the way that like say straight edge or something like that had become very popular. Like straight edge shows would regularly sell out in in the New Jersey, New York area. Like that was like a movement, like a social movement, right? Like you put on the uniform, you put the X on your hand, and like for the positive or the negative aspects of straight edge, because there are actually a lot of really good things about straight edge, right? Like I'm from my perspective, I think they got a lot of things right. Unfortunately, being kids, the typical thing is it goes from being right to being, oh, I'm right. And that means I'm better than you. And that means, it's like the kind of arrogant shit that like people think when they're young, right? Like, I mean, I used to have this stupid idea when I was a kid that like, the more accessible the music, the worse it is. And I mean, unfortunately, there's probably still some truth that I feel that way, right? Like it's a joke, like does liking one genre of music versus another make you a better person? No, absolutely not. Um, but but is there a what's the word? Is there a aspect of being able to interact with or understand other kinds of music that are far less conventional? I mean, it doesn't make you an inherently better person. It just means that you gravitate towards different kinds of things, right? Like and the Gridlink stuff, the BPR or the BPRA, sorry, that's my comic books. My the DA stuff, the no one knows what the dead thing stuff. Like all of these bands have a lot of allusions to other things. They talk about personal matters and feelings through metaphors that are not as thick as some people think they are. I just don't think they understand the source material, or they're not familiar with the source material, right? Yeah, Andrew, who from do you remember Grinded Punishment? Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't think so.
Grind and Punishment was one of the first grindcore blogs. Like I forget when he started it. Again, it was like probably early 2000s. And the guy who wrote it, his name is Andrew. Andrew ended up being the guy who wrote the book about the inalienable dreamless after the tsunami in Japan. And we wanted to find a way to give some money to the Japanese Red Cross, which was, struggling for money and donations at the time. So we put out, Andrew wrote a book about the inalienable dreamless, did a lot of research. It's like a, I don't know, 40-page book. And we put it in, we kept it in print for like, I don't know, 6 months or a year. And basically every nickel we made from it went to the Japanese Red Cross. But Andrew, when he was sort of like charting the story of the inalienable dreamless and then like discordance access and then like who was actually understanding and getting into this kind of music, why was it more popular in Japan? It's like, it's a great question, right? Like, is it a cultural thing? The first time I went to Tokyo was the first time I felt really comfortable. Like all of the signage, all of the movement, all of the lights, it made New York City feel like it made New York City feel almost archaic. And New York City was a very vibrant city, right? I mean, forget about Times Square. The whole city's got a lot of light, a lot of movement. Like New York is a very fast moving, at least in the 90s and 2000s, New York's a very fast moving city, right? There is a thing like the New York walking pace. Like if you work in New York for a couple of years and you move someplace else, you're walking typically 3 to 4 times faster than everybody else wherever you go because the pace of life is so fast there. But like in Tokyo, it's the same pace, but there's just more going on. So the sort of density of information and the density of life, like people are really compact in Tokyo. It definitely it came through in our music and like the cult, like I mean I grew up being really into anime and Japanese stuff in general, like Japanese music in general. Like most of the records I used to, there's a record store in New York City that doesn't exist anymore called Kim's Underground, and we used to travel into New York City to go to Kim's Underground to buy like the new Japanese releases when they would come out. Because other than that, like in the early 90s, if you wanted to buy these records, you literally had to write to people for their like photocopied list of stuff they were selling. And once you got that, you then would send them like either cash or an international postal money order, and then maybe 6 to 10 weeks later you'd get the CD or the cassette tape or whatever you bought, right? It is a very different system, right? There's a lot more trust involved with doing mail order in the late 80s and early 90s, because these people were sight unseen just running mailing lists, and once you're on their mailing list, like every couple of months you would get like a photocopied little like pamphlet that listed all of the new things that had come out, and you could just, you basically checked them off and sent them money, and they'd send it back to you, because the guys didn't keep them in stock. They would typically have to go to other record stores, I think, and buy them, and then you were paying their markup for going to get the stuff and mailing it to you. But yeah, like what was coming out of Japan at that time, like just art wise in general, much more saturated with meaning and nuanced at every layer. Like even a pop band like X Japan, they essentially went from being like a thrash band to, basically a band like Kiss, like a hard rock band. But even their hard rock stuff has a lot of stuff going on it. Like they have a lot of emotion, they have a lot of layers. Like all the artwork is very purposeful. All of the lyrics are very purposeful. They all have really incredible meaning. And even if they're not playing like the heaviest stuff ever, like watching them play, like you can see how much emotion is going into the music. And it's less performative and more intimate, even though they're doing less intimate style music, if that makes sense. And that I think that was not what was happening in the States, right? America was a very performative country, and God, what was the band? They were an Australian band. I think they were called Rupture. Rupture. They basically had a whole band that was essentially making fun of this, right? Like all of their stuff was super anti-environment, anti-political correctness, like super like intentionally like sarcastically misogynist, because they were making fun of all the ridiculous layers of bullshit that people were putting into their music, but not actually living in their lives, right? Like because they understood probably earlier than anybody that the sort of Western notion of like liberation and freedom and oppression and all that stuff, a lot of that stuff is like very manufactured, because people don't actually understand what it's like to suffer. A lot of the times they have a notion of what suffering is. Like everybody has their own version of suffering, right? Like you create a band like this because like you're suffering in some way, right? Like I didn't start doing grindcore. I didn't gravitate towards grindcore because I was like a super happy guy who was very outgoing and had great relationships with people. Like I didn't have that. Like that's why I listen to this kind of music. Like you don't listen to something like Merzbow or Hija Kaidan or Hana Tarash or like Japanese noise bits. You don't listen to stuff like that if you're a well-adjusted person, right? Like you have to be able to go someplace pretty fucked up to be able to listen to these walls of distortion and noise and find something in it, right? It's like literally looking at like it's worse than like looking at an artwork that's like artwork that's like just like a flat plane of color with nuance in it and like trying to find something in it. This is like actually something that's like hurting you, right? Like the sound is not pleasant, but you're finding something pleasant in it, right? Like it's like sada. That's why I think why Hija Kaidan specifically had a lot of sadomasochistic stuff in their earlier work. Like they would regularly have a dominatrix as part of their performance, and like she would like I think she would like use strap-ons on other members of the band. She would piss on the audience, not Gigi Allen, like not like wild like eccentric over the top performative, like, oh my god, I'm a performance artist, I'm covering myself with ants, please help me, not like that, but just much more like God, I guess I keep coming back to the word intimate, like something that's so much more personal that like if you understand it's got like this incredible resonance, and music like that. It's funny, there was a period in my life where I absolutely was really interested in music like that, and I listened to a lot of it. Like Borbeta Magus was a formative band for a lot of people because it was the first true departure from like song structure into something completely emotional. But then on the other end of that, now here I am doing Gridlink and Discordance Access, and so much of that music is about songwriting, right? Like I've heard Witty say it a bunch of times. Discordance Access was very much about Voivod, right? Like Voivod was the idea of songwriting in Voivod was so different than any other heavy metal band or thrash metal band of their era. Like the three really unique artists in the 80s that I always remember, the ones that I wanted to get the t-shirts from first, Celtic Frost, Slayer, and Voivod. because they all had this really different sound and it was all really unique. Like Celtic Frost really felt monstrous in a way that none of the other bands, like, they felt epic, right? Like, and even at the time, like, some of those records I didn't like. I hated Into the Pandemonium when it came out. I was so not ready for that record. And today I listened to it and I'm like, God, it really is a brilliant record. And I understand why high school me didn't get it, because that's not what I was looking for. It's an 8, right? Like, and it's not like a perfect record by any stretch of the imagination. Most people will say, Morbid Tales or Megatherion are their masterpieces, and those are my two favorite records by them also. Like, I don't care about Hellhammer as much. I mean, they were cool also, but like, hearing Morbid Tales after having heard Hellhammer, Morbid Tales was such a huge step up. It just was much catchier and it had more atmosphere. But Voivod, I remember, like Slayer was like absolute insanity and horror. Like, I was listening to Rain and Blood coincidentally yesterday, and when you listen to that record, it really is about like the descent into madness of the human condition, right? Like, even if you basically ignore the themes that they're talking about, cannibalism, serial killers, witches, pandemics, Auschwitz, like death camps, cannibalism, like religious sacrifice, and then ultimately, like, ending on, like, Raining Blood is essentially about Judgment Day, right? But it's a Judgment Day that's gone backwards, right? And that's why, like, Now I Shall Rain in Blood, and then the whole ending of that record. When I was listening to the cassette tape for that record, it like the vinyl version and the CD versions now, they have the rain kind of ring out a little bit longer. On the cassette version, which is what most people had when it came out, like, they have that whole thing where they're going faster and faster, and then the guitar is losing all coherency, and it's just different. Like, it's not even guitar solos at that point, right? It's literally just, they're just making as much uncomfortable noise as possible and going as fast as possible, and then it just cuts dead into the rain clap, the thunder clap, and it rains for like 3 seconds, and it just hard stops. And it was so abrupt and so utterly brutal, and the record was so dry compared to every other metal record at that point. It was much better produced than any hardcore record, like Ripcord, or I don't know, Heresy, or I'm trying to think of other hardcore bands that were sort of like around at that point. I wasn't super into hardcore yet in the mid '80s, or Dead Kennedys, right? Black Flag. Like, they didn't have anything approaching that level of production, and they certainly didn't have anything approaching that level of just like raw emotion. Like, it's really hard to be, you grow up today and you hear Rain and Blood, and you probably heard like other bands that are making, I don't know, they're making like extreme music, right? And we've gotten so much more extreme in terms of the ability to play and the production and the lyrics of say Rain and Blood. But Rain and Blood is kind of a unique record in history. Like, it's almost like Chuck Berry level important, or like the first time you hear Led Zeppelin 4, or the first time like people heard the Beatles. It is such an impactful record, and to hear that when it came out in '86, I was 13 years old when that record came out, and I remember, like, this is just a weird metaphor. So you have your school, and then there was a library across the street from the school, and then behind the library is this like shitty gravel area where people would go and smoke cigarettes and listen to music on boom boxes. And that was the first time I heard Rain and Blood. And I remember when they put it on, I'd heard Hell Awaits before that, and I thought Hell Awaits was, I thought that was the shit, right? Like, Hell Awaits, like, holy crap, how can you get crazier than Hell Awaits? And I heard Rain and Blood, and I was just like, holy fucking shit. Like, and then every record that came out after Rain and Blood for the next 2 years sounded like Rain and Blood, or people trying to get as close to Rain and Blood as possible. Crater was a great example. They had Pleasure to Kill, which was that's a balls out crazy record. But then they did Terrible Certainty, I think a couple years later, after South of Heaven, I think, came out. And Terrible Certainty basically was like their version of Rain and Blood, which was a great record at the time. Like, I absolutely love Terrible Certainty. It's probably my favorite Creator record. I think actually everybody in Discordance Access loved that that Creator record more than any other one. But I mean, maybe that's a way of coming back around and saying that, like, Discordance Access as grindcore comes from metal. We're not a hardcore sound. We're not a punk rock sound, even though we like that kind of music. In the same way that when Repulsion talks about how they started out, they basically saw Slayer and like, oh, I want to go faster than Slayer, right? And I love Repulsion. Repulsion is actually, the Horrified is actually probably one of my favorite records ever made. It's up there with Rain and Blood. But Repulsion is nowhere as dark as Slayer. right? Repulsion is actually much like when I listen to it now. Repulsion. I didn't hear Repulsion when it had initially come out. I think the first time I heard it was somebody sent me a cassette tape right after the guy from Carcass was going to put it out on his record label, and they had just finished remixing it. And I was like, oh, cool. It's going to be a new thing on Necrosis Records, because, you know, there weren't a lot of record labels that did this kind of stuff at that point. But when Repulsion came out, that's I mean, you listen to that record, it's basically a thrash song played 100,000 times faster, right? Like it's like verse, chorus, guitar solo, verse, chorus, end, right? And Discordance, while Discordance didn't typically have traditional strong song structures like verse, chorus, what we did have was the notion of like the Voivod notion of like songwriting, right? Like Dimension Hatros is a great example of a record that it's got a lot of traditional song structure in it, but it's a really unusual record. Like Dimension Hatros, Nothing Face, and Killing Technology were kind of the big ones for us. And once again, like when after Nothing Face was kind of like right at the edge of what I could deal with in high school. When they went beyond that, I forget what came after Nothing Face. I think it was Angel Rat. Like I just couldn't even deal with Angel Rat. It's like, what is this? You know, this is not what I'm looking for. And because the big attraction for Voivod for a lot of people I knew, all three of the people I knew who Voivod was when they were around in the 80s, the big attraction was like when you played the tape, people would be like, what's wrong with this record? Like, why are they playing out of tune? Like, what's going on with this? Like, this doesn't sound right. And it's like, oh, I like that. It makes everybody feel uncomfortable, right? Like, it makes me feel more comfortable that other people are uncomfortable with it. And that's where you get into the songwriting structure, right? Like that carries forward to like Gridlink and Hayaino Daisuki and No One Knows What the Dead Think, because Takafumi is also a huge Voivod guy. And while I'm not going to speak for him, I know that he also really loves that old era Voivod stuff, like, you know, Dimension Hatros, Killing Technology, Nothing Face. Those are most it's funny, most great guitar players I know, people who I think of as great guitar players, they all cite those three records as like masterpiece records, right? So it's like, can you combine something, the creativity of Voivod with the fucking absolute emotional annihilation of Rain and Blood? And that's what we were trying to do, right? Like that's the structures we were trying to create. And I think that's what you hear in a lot of the music.
Yeah, definitely. You know, so it works really well in the case of all those bands, you know. But you know, how do you approach a song that's like a minute long, right? And how do you make it sound so complete? Like that's one thing I could never understood. Like, because you know, I don't want to insult other grindcore bands, but a lot of times, you know, a lot of grindcore is like, hey, let's see how much noise we can make for a minute, or maybe we have a riff, and you know, they just hold it before it devolves into absolute crap. But then, you know, you guys are capable of actually like making a song feel complete within a minute, which is insane.
I mean, so part of that is the fact that the band is not collaborative, which so the I'm trying to remember who I heard this from. Somebody I think it was somebody at Decibel during one of the interviews for the Inalienable Dreamless book had said that every band that's going to be great has to have somebody in the band with their head up their own ass. And like that they're so confident and arrogant about what they're doing that they can like sort of override everybody else to deliver a vision that makes the band, you know, it makes it not only unique, but it makes it a struggle within the band to make the music, right? So in Gridlink, that is Takafumi. Like this, it is his songwriting. Now, me and him would collaborate on songwriting, but really it's his songwriting. Like I had ideas. So a process for us was like, let's look at this picture, and we would find beautiful pieces of artwork which have an entire complete story in them, right? Like you're talking about a song that it feels complete. I look at a piece of artwork, and if I can look at a piece of artwork and get a whole story from a piece of artwork, it's the same thing, right? Like a single image is telling me an entire story versus having to go through a book. That's very hard to do, right? And the same thing goes with songwriting, right? Like we would take a piece of artwork, look at it, and be like, okay, like this is what I see in it. Okay, and he's like, I'm gonna go take that and write. and then he would write a song. Like Takafumi is an incredibly gifted musician, right? I will say that it is not an accident, but I'm also lucky to have only worked with Rob Martin and Takafumi as guitar players, because I think they're probably the two most accomplished guitar players in the art form we're talking about, right? I mean, there's other great guitar players out there, of course, but like I am not the most. I do not have a tremendous amount of range as a performer myself. Like my range is what you've heard. Essentially, I've gone as far as I can go, and those guys are choosing to stay where they are because the genre. I mean, I believe they're choosing to stay where they are because that genre of music is what speaks to them the most. But they, each individually could have been capable of so much more if they wanted to be, because it is storytelling. It's storytelling with music, right? Like all human experience that's positive is pattern and storytelling, right? Like people enjoy music because they like the pattern. Like the pattern is somehow like it's not just predictable, which people like. People like predictable structures, but it's a predictable emotional response that you have to things. And there are simpler things, like, not to pick on like hardcore, but like if you look at like modern hardcore music, right? To me, it's so predictable and it's so boring and it's so performative. I'm so not interested in it. And I honestly never really was that interested in it. But Takafumi loves it. Like Takafumi loves performative hardcore, where it's like, everybody like they do the sweeping motion with their arms, they clear their space, and they do the karate moves and like the punches. And I'm like, hey man, like that's cool. Like I actually don't have a problem with people like expressing that the way, like if that's what you feel, fucking do it. And if you're in a room full of people that feel the same way, even better. I know that like when I go to I go to see Morbid Angel, I still like them. Like they're bands from my youth, and I still like to go see them play. Like I intentionally won't go into a quote unquote mosh pit, right? Like I'm not going to go and pit, because the way I'm used to it from the 80s is so different than how people do it today, that the last time I got dragged into a pit, I got in a fight with people and didn't realize it was happening. I thought they were still having fun, and I was just like clocking people, and like they're like, "Why are you such an asshole?" I'm like, "Oh no, that's right, young people. Yeah, like they get upset when you bump against them. Like it's push pits now. It's not like physically getting hurt." Because like going to see Slayer in the 80s, or going to see them in the 90s, or going to a lot of concerts that of bands I liked, you were getting hurt at those shows. Like those were physical violence. It was like uncontrolled boxing, right? like people are kicking you and hitting you. It's not personal, right? Like that's like part of the energy and the explosion. And so people like that simplicity. It's why Taylor Swift is so possible, right? Like, how does Taylor Swift make people, young women or people, feel, right? They feel good, right? There's something about her music that makes them feel good. Hilariously, I've only heard one song by her, and I don't care about it at all. There's like there's a lot of different artists who are really popular today. Oh God, what's her name? Billie Eilish is one. Like I'm kind of interested in people who write their own music still. So like my wife and daughter really like Billie Eilish, and so I listen to some of her music, and I'm like, okay, it's not for me. Like but I get what she's doing, and I can hear what she's doing. Like she's very predictable. She's sad songs, very like not high energy. It's not shoegaze music necessarily, but I listen to it and I'm like, I imagine people like sedating themselves and listening to this. Like the world is too much, and this is going to give them relief. Whereas like on the opposite end of the spectrum, the world is too much, and I'm going to explode with anger, right? Or I'm going to, or I'm gonna, or the world is too much, I'm gonna party, right? Like I mean, Dave Whitty's and Municipal Waste, not my favorite band. I totally understand why people love them though, right? Like I'm not looking for that like good vibes, like friendly moshing party feeling. Like that's not what I want in music. But it's what a lot of people want. It's not really that much different than Taylor Swift. It's just a little bit heavier, right? Like they're looking for a good feeling. And there's a lot of Japanese heavy metal I like that gives me that good feeling. Like Sex Machine Guns, just this like hair metal band from the 90s and 2000s that I like absolutely loved for years. And super not serious lyrics, but really, really good songs, like really good songwriting. A lot of riffs they stole from other bands, but like still really fun band. And when I saw them live a couple of times, some of the best overall energy I ever had at a live show, like, because they were like, their audience was mostly Japanese high school girls. So you go to a place like Budokan and it's sold out. It's like all Japanese high school girls, and they're all dressed in like metal clothing. And when the fast parts come, it's like the whole audience is like windmilling, headbanging in synchronicity. And it's wild, right? Like everybody is having such a good time. I'm like, yeah, like I love this. Like this is great. Like it doesn't make me like want to feel violent. It makes me feel good. So I understand it, but it feels good to me partially because it's so fast, right? And that's just my natural proclivity to being into fast stuff, right? Like sometimes I imagine, like I talk to people about stuff, and I imagine that the little meme gif of the guy's like, "How's it going, little dude?" And then there's a picture of me and I spout bullshit for like, 1,000 miles an hour for like 20 minutes straight, and the other guy's like, "Holy shit!" like that. That's like every interview I've ever done. But I mean, so again, to come back to what the original question you asked about songwriting and structure, it's all about storytelling, right? Like it's like patterns without having patterns. Like Coronet Juniper has more pattern on it than I think any of our previous records really did. There's a lot of repeated verses and things like that, which makes it a little bit easier to like engage with. But Coronet Juniper, when Takafumi wrote it, he actually wrote the whole album in order, and it was supposed to start from like the most like I don't know what he said. His words were like, it was like the easiest song to the hardest song. So Revenant Orchard was always supposed to be the last song, but Ocean Vertigo was supposed to be the song that came before it. The second song was supposed to be Christ, I can't remember the names of our own songs. Refrain. But I didn't like the choreography of the songs. I thought that progression was too linear, and I wanted it to be more jarring when you listen to it. So I switched some of the continuity around. I'm very happy with the continuity on the record. I think it has a good sort of motion up and down, because with grindcore especially, I'm thinking about not just per song, I'm thinking about an album, right? Like that's part of the Rain and Blood thing. Once you hear Rain and Blood and you've heard like the perfect album, you're always looking for the perfect album, right? You're looking for that perfect lap that they talk about in Ford versus Ferrari. Like every time I look at a record, every time I think about something, or I'm writing a book, or whatever I'm working on, I'm thinking about how can I get the best overall arc. Like I used to just want that arc to be constant furious intensity, and like that was the early Discordance stuff. And as we got later into Discordance, we definitely figured out that like having peaks and valleys was good, as long as the valleys weren't like just like overtly generic mosh parts, right? Because that shows lack of creativity. It shows lack of, for me, it feels like a lack of investment in the music, because you're just playing what everybody else has played, and it's not how we feel, so it's not genuine, right? Like everybody in Discordance was about speed. Everybody in Gridlink is about speed. We may have differing ideas of how you get there, or how you sell that, but even on an intellectual level, God, I can't believe I said that. On a how to do this? On a more thoughtful level, like a band I'm gonna pick a band that doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not no one's gonna get butthurt. Like the Dead Kennedys. Okay, so Dead Kennedys is actually a very sophisticated band in terms of their lyrics writing, right? Like they write about a lot of different subject matter, but as they get later into the history of the band, like the humor and the interesting stuff that's on like Plastic Surgery Disaster is gone, and it's basically just like, it sounds like a goddamn communist political rally by the time you get to Bedtime for Democracy, which is a record it's like, I don't know what's worse, Bedtime for Democracy or the Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. I really hate Fresh Fruit for Rotting. It's such a boring record to me, because it literally just sounds like a political speech. Bedtime, at least they pick the energy up again, I guess. So that's a better record. But like there's so much just filler on those records where it's like, oh my God, really? Like you're just gonna like just give us a speech about fucking X, Y, or Z now. No more nuance, no subtlety, no room for us to have our own ideas. We're just gonna like steamroller that shit in. Okay, cool. I think a lot of people are far more comfortable with simple, stupid ideas that don't actually hold up, versus mature, thoughtful ideas that require introspection. And that's another thing that really draws me to Voivod consistently over the years, is they have a lot of things going on in their songs, right? They're using the science fiction metaphor as a lens to talk about different issues. I tended to use video games and anime a lot as the metaphor to talk about stuff. But like it was a thinly veiled metaphor because if you actually understand the source material, again, going back to something I said earlier, like when I frame a song and I'm using the some of the language from a game, Japanese like shooter game like Mars Matrix, which probably like 99% of the people who listen to the record have never even heard of, right? Like they don't have no idea what it is. It just goes completely over their head, right? But for the people who did get it, like there's a much more complex idea there. So when you find out later in life, like so many people who like get to meet you or like talk to you and they're like so disappointed by the fact that you're not a carbon copy of who they are. Like, oh, I thought you were going to be more like me. Oh, I thought you'd have the same interest in me. It's like, well, why would you want somebody to be a copy of you? What are you looking for? Are you looking for a connectivity? Because this is not necessarily the genre for connectivity, right? Like I mean, the art form is essentially that of estrangement, right? Like this is like when I think about grindcore, I don't think about like when people say grindcore is protest. I'm like, no, that's ridiculous, right? Like actual protest is going in like if there's something you're deeply unhappy about in the world, is doing whatever you need to change that thing, right? And by doing it yourself, not forcing other people to do it at gunpoint, right? Like that's an important distinction between how I think that like a band like Rush, for example, might approach a subject and talk about something that's like a complicated subject. They'll talk about it through a much more nuanced lens and leave there be room for the person who's listening to it to like come up with their own thoughts. I don't care for music where it's just like X is bad or Y is good or some stupid simple slogan. Like that doesn't interest me. That's like at that point, are you really any different than like television, right? Because television is made for people educated in the United States to like the fifth and sixth grade level. I don't know what that equivalent is in Europe right now or Australia or Japan or wherever, but that's a fairly low level of education. And I'm not interested in, I don't watch TV at all. So why would I want to listen to music that sounds like that, right? You know, um, like, are you tracking me?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I hate to use that term, but mincecore is really for me like the worst element of that in when it comes to lyrics and extreme music.
I don't even know what mincecore is, dude. What I'm looking it up on the internet.
Uh, just think of like Napalm Death for people born in the mid '90s.
Oh God. Okay, so Agathocles, or I'm slaughtering their name, Agathocles, because they've been around forever. They were back in like a million years ago. They were the band that put out like a split 7-inch with everybody, and it was the same 3 songs.
Yeah, I mean, I know a guy who told me like, look, if you tell them that you'll pay for the pressing and manufacturing and distribution, they'll do a split with anyone.
Well, I mean, good on them, I guess, if that's what they want to do. Like, I don't personally get anything out of their music. I haven't, in all fairness to them, I haven't listened to anything they've done since maybe 92, 91, something like that. Like a long time, like whatever they were on one of the Blearg comps that I heard, and I think that was the last thing I heard from them. And I'm like, yep, still the same band. And it's cool, like they're doing their thing, and if that's what they're into, but it's not for me. Like that's not what I'm looking for, right?
Yeah, definitely no. You need something a lot more. It doesn't even have to be nuanced. I think the most important thing for me, like first and foremost, it has to be something cool. Just no matter how abstract or dense or whatever, it just has to be cool first and foremost.
I mean, cool is obviously a subjective thing because what you find cool and I find cool is going to be different, right? Like just right, and I think that was kind of the point I was making about like with music earlier. Like, hey man, Taylor Swift is cool for a lot of people, right? Like Taylor Swift is like what they're looking for, and like a younger version of me might be kind of like arrogant about that and be like, well, fuck them, they're just boring. Versus like older me is like, well, I mean, if that's what they're looking for, that's what they're looking for, right? Like, I mean, it's not what I want, but as long as I don't have to listen to it, I don't care.
Exactly.
I mean, all joking aside, like the first 4 Anal Cunt 7-inches were some of my favorite records for years. Like especially Split 7 with Nausea, another EP. I mean, 52,000 or 5,200, song 7-inch. I forget it was like 5274 or something like that. Like I remember the first time I put that on, I was just laughing. I was like, oh my God, this is so funny that they did this. You know, like it's not like a record I'm ever going to listen to again, but like the fact that they did it was hilarious. And like I loved Anal Cunt. I love the fact that they didn't have any structure, that they didn't have any song lyrics, that they didn't have any song names, and like I thought that was great. You know, I'm like a complete rejection of like the I don't know what you call it, the performative nature of like righteousness in like, you know, what's essentially like a bunch of guys screaming into a microphone. And I thought that was great. Like I actually thought AC was incredible, right? Like I mean, I will say that like no shit, the first time I heard Anal Cunt was like a life-changing experience for me because I was not prepared to hear something that fast and that absolutely unhinged. Like the split with 7 Minutes of Nausea. I was at an art school in Rhode Island. And I was at the store and I just bought like the Pathological compilation. I was so excited because it was a new Napalm song. Yeah, I was like, oh my God, Napalm Death, you know, they're my, like, I love this band right now. And they're like, oh, have you heard Anal Cunt? I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, hold on 1 second, like, hold my beer. And next thing you know, they put it on, and I was like, I'm buying that. What does it cost? I don't even care. That's amazing. What the hell is this? Yeah. So again, I guess just the point is that like, yeah, anything can be cool, and like, and like, what's cool can vary very quick, by time. Because I mean, I'm 50, coming on 51 this year. Killing Technology or Rain and Blood or the Napalm Death Peel sessions, literally the first time I heard those records, there was no equivalent. There was nothing else like that when it came out. Like I can't even, I'm not like the last record I bought was, I think they were called Hauntologist, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. It sounds like Megla. You know, like I like Megla. Megla is cool too. You know, really dark and like haunting sounding music. And apparently some of the guys in Megla are in Hauntologist. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, you know, like I don't necessarily care what their songs are about. Like I don't like look at their lyrics at all. Like it's not that deep for me. But I like the feeling, like that sort of like that like haunted atmospheric feeling that like Dode Heimsgard were one of the first bands I heard that could really make a song sound like haunted. Like, oh wow, that sounds like, you know, like it was like watching a good horror movie, right? Like, oh, there's a creepy feeling when I listen to this music. So I don't get that from anything else, but like they do it pretty nicely. But again, I'm running off on a tangent, so you know, fuck me.
All right, you know, I want to go through one final thing. Now, this is something that I found so weird in your lyrics, like throughout a lot of your projects. Like, you know, a lot of the kind of Japanese themes and you know, the anime, the manga, the video game, like it's exploded in the kind of like English speaking world quite a bit in the last 10 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a lot of times when people reference that within kind of like Western works, it just feels so cringe and so stupid. You know what I mean? There's like something that annoys me about a guy who discovered Dragon Ball Z in his 20s, right? Yet, you know, you managed to kind of like take the best side, you know, of that entire world, you know, even Final Fantasy VII, you know, because that was remade a few years ago into absolute shit. But like,
I agree with you, but still, no,
I'm sorry, I just can't stand, like, the voice acting just gets on my nerves. No, that's not how it goes, okay? You know what I mean?
It was better if you played it with the Japanese audio. Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, man.
I mean, I could go on for about FF6 to FF10. I could go on for like hours, but but I digress. You know, how do you incorporate, you know, such themes that without making it cringe? You know, for heaven's sake, you know, Longena is literally a kernel from a bullet hell game, right?
Correct. Yes. Well, so there's a couple of things here. So thematically, do you actually okay, now we're going into like total like autistic territory. So do you actually understand who Long Henna is in the world of Dodonpachi, the Donpachi like universe?
Mate, I saw a 200 comment thread on a blog explaining the entire story as a response to a review of Longena, the album.
That's hilarious. Okay. So Long Henna is a guy who essentially is responsible for creating a project of super soldiers, and depending on the specific game, he almost always betrays these people that he sends out to fight this, like, the Armageddon, the final war. And I mean, this is literally in the lyrics to Long Henna. Second loop begins. The second loop of the game is if you can one credit the game and you get the true ending where Long Henna tells you that he's betrayed you. And the game plays front to back again, but twice as hard. And the level of focus and discipline it takes to get through a bullet hell game of that magnitude to actually get to the second loop and then to complete the second loop without just dumping quarters into the machine. I've never been able to do it. Like, I've gotten to the second loop once. And I haven't played Dodonpachi in maybe, like, once again, I have it on like Sega Saturn or something. I haven't played it since like 2005 or 2006. But it was a game that I spent, I think, a year with. Like, I didn't play almost anything else for a year. And so the concept with Discordance Access, there's a lot of different concepts flowing around. Gridlink takes place after 9/11, and I'm a very different person after 9/11. I've grown up a lot. I've spent a lot of time in other countries. I think I have a better sense of the world, and I have a better sense of like a cycle of history. And one of the things I always appreciated about Tomio era Universal Century Gundam is that he got so much right about people. Like Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta Gundam and Shah's Counterattack. These are incredible films that have so many truths in them that, like, as an adult, I can see it. And I loved them as a kid, but I didn't appreciate what he was getting at. And I get it as an adult. And it's like, and I'm like, I mean, my God, there are so few works of fiction out there that really got what human beings were like as the UC Gundam stuff that Tomio did. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the same thing for Evangelion. Obviously, Evangelion had a huge impact on me. And I thought Evangelion is like one of the sort of, like, for me, was like one of the definitive works on the human condition. It's the original series is so well done. It touches on so many things that I felt in my own life that I when I saw the Death and Rebirth film in the theaters, we were on tour in '97, and I got to go see it theatrically. It actually completely changed how I approached music, because I was like, I've been a coward up until this point. I have hidden behind things and ideas that were not really as genuine as they should be. Like, I was getting there. I was breaking away from like the if you look at, it's like anybody else, as you grow over the years, like, you become more mature, you have more complex ideas. So if you look at the ideas on the original Discordance records and then you compare and contrast them with, say, like Joho or Inalienable Dreamless, like, those are much more conflicted records, right? There's a lot of things we're talking about on those records that nobody else is really talking about it, not only in our genre, but in general, right? Like, there's not music being written about these things. Like, when we came back from Japan in '95, we wrote the Plutocracy split and the Melpomene split. And I think it was Ben from Drop Dead who called me up after those came out, and he's like, yeah, I've always hated your band, but like this record, like, you finally figured out who you are. And he's like, I love it, and I want to see more of it. And I was like, oh, cool, thanks a lot, Ben. Because Drop Dead, I love Drop Dead. Like, they're a great band. Like, they're not a band I'm like super into, but I love them. If that makes any sense. It's like,
Yeah.
like I don't seek out their music. Like, their messaging does not resonate with me, but I feel their passion and their honesty of what they're doing. It's there was a band I think from Sweden called Disconto. Similar thing. Like, I'm not really into what they're putting out, but like their passion for and how they deliver it on record, it's like, I mean, they're basically like a Discharge style band, but they're so fucking good. Like, I had like 6 of their records at one point and loved every one of them, and like, don't care about the lyrics at all, not into the politics, doesn't matter to me, but like, I just love the honesty, like the depth. And because I care about, and this is the stuff I related to as a kid, like, I wasn't interested in a lot of other things that I think more conventional musicians were into, right? Like, I was always out on the fringe. In the early '80s, it wasn't exactly common to find somebody who watched something like Super Dimensional Fortress Macross or collected comic books, Moss Peta, Space Cruiser Yamato. Like I had these books when I was like 10 and 11 years old. That's how I learned to draw. I used to buy these books and like literally just draw the stuff in them over and over and over again until I could draw it correctly. And so I was connected with this material on a really deep level. So for me, there's an inseparable part of myself that I understand the world through the lens of these things, because even simple games like a shooter game like Ikaruga, which doesn't even have a ton of story, actually has a lot of story in it. And I mean, I don't use words like cringe. I think that's I don't I like to be more explicit when I talk about things, because I feel like it's easy to just like throw labels on things and say this sucks or this is that or this. I used to do shit like that when I was younger, and I'm kind of ashamed of my behavior. But you know what? It's just a growth thing, right? Like understanding that, like, hey man, if you don't like something, you want to express that, you owe it to people to do it more than a like some stupid comment like fart noises or whatever, like, oh, I don't believe you, you're a racist, or just throwing like casting aspersions on people because they don't happen to feel the way you do, and not really being able to explain it another other way than, well, you're just wrong or this or that. Like that doesn't cut water with me. It doesn't, or break bread or whatever you want to say. Like I don't have any respect for these people. They're not even worth my time. And the so to have the stuff be integrated, I'm not talking about like the like because Dragon Ball as a manga is incredible. Like I actually really love the Dragon Ball manga. They're very funny, right? Like they're very comedic, and they have a lot of good action. They're like kung fu movies. They're really well done, and I love Toriyama's work. That said, I don't have all the Dragon Ball books anymore. Like I had them, I read them, I gave them to my nephews and nieces when they got old enough to read them, because they're hilarious and they're fun, and the artwork is beautiful, which is something I think is really lacking in American comics for a long time. Like the actual skill and illustration has not been really present, unfortunately, for many years, in most comic books in America. Like I couldn't tell you. If you said right now my kid wants to get into comic books, pick 10 comic books for him to read, maybe one or two of them is going to be American, and none of them were going to have been made in the 21st century. Like like I'm gonna go. I'll reference like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. Like that's a masterpiece, and that's a Kate book, which I don't even particularly love. I'm more likely to go and grab like the original run of Bad Company from 2000 AD, or even some Judge Dredd stuff, because even though it's very pulpy, there's a lot of like intelligence, there's a lot of smarts and meaning in that. And I because just like Alien is like basically a pulp horror film, but it's like the pulp horror film. Like you can elevate like an art form to whatever level you want if you invest enough of yourself into it. It's hard. It's not going to resonate with everybody, but you're going to be able to reach more, I think, more people. And like the theme of Gridlink really is derived from Armored Core in many ways, where like there was a theory of the Armored Core games where basically in each game in the series, you defeated the opponent, the final opponent in the game, and when you would start the next game, essentially your character from the previous game was the opponent you were playing in the next game. Does that make any sense? So like you're always, every new generation is fighting the previous generation. And Dark Souls 3 had that as well. The ending of Dark Souls 3, when you get to the end and you're fighting what appears to be your player character from an earlier iteration of the game guarding the fire. And it's like that's a thematic thing and From Software stuff. And the book Forever War by Joe Haldeman, which I've seen. If you don't know the book, Forever War is a book. It's a science fiction book about Vietnam by a Vietnam veteran who came back from the war, wrote a book called I think it was called 68, which is a great book. It was later published, but at the time he couldn't get anybody to publish Forever War because nobody wanted to read a book about Vietnam. And the Forever War is about going to fight a war for a country that when you come back to it, you don't recognize. That people change on you as you're going away, and like the heart sometimes forgets. And there's a Motoko, I think Motoko Shinkani is his name. He did a anime, like one man anime, like in the 90s. I remember buying the DVD from Comics Wave. It was called The Voice of a Distant Star, and it's about it's got a theme of relativity in it, where like there's a couple and they're in high school and they select certain people to go off and fight this interstellar war. And the boy is left behind. He doesn't make the cut, and the girl makes the cut. And she goes off into space to fight this like interstellar war to protect the Earth. And over the years, she's not aging and he is. So he gets married and has a kid and is doing things. And every 5, 10, 20 years, as she's getting further out, it takes longer for the messages to get back. She's still in love with him. She never forgot him, but his world has changed. Like, she can't go back to him, right? She can never go back to him. It was a theme in Gunbuster too, the idea of relativity, where and I'm assuming you're familiar with all of this obscure shit I'm talking about, but Gunbuster is another series where it deals with relativity in an intergalactic war. So you have these young people who are going off to fight, and the world is changing behind them. People, it's not that people forget them, but people even forget that there's a war happening because it's so far away from them that they forget about the sacrifice of these people. And there's a scene near the end of the series, one of the best animated series in my opinion, prior to probably Evangelion, and it's in much of the same team as Evangelion. But there's a scene where one of the characters goes back to Earth to be with the man she loves, and he's dying of cancer. So she stays with him till he dies. It takes about 15 or 20 years. And then she goes back out into space to be part of the final battle. And as she's going back out, like, these young people are saying, is it even worth going to fight? Are we wasting all this money? Is there even an enemy? Like, I haven't seen the enemy. It's been like 40 years since we heard about them. But meanwhile, out in deep space in relativity, these people haven't aged more than a couple weeks. So when this woman goes back to rejoin the people, that for them, she just left like a couple of days ago, but she comes back and like none of them recognize her because she's like a 45, 50-year-old woman now, and they're still all in their early 20s. And like, I feel like that has really happened in America and possibly around the world. I'm not sure where you're from, but like, I've seen it happen where, like, we went to war against and I say we collectively as the West went to war against a radical religious ideology that was willing to mass murder people for an ideology that even I didn't understand at the time. I became so well read on Islam. It's funny, I'm not raised religious. I know probably more about Islam than I do Christianity or Judaism because I had to read so much about it because I wanted to understand what we were fighting about. Like, I wanted to understand what was actually at stake here. So I spent like literally years reading about the subject, reading the Quran, different translations of it, trying to understand like how they got from where they are to where they were. I mean, different translations and how they were altered. Really interesting stuff. But so many of my peer group now has gone to war and come back to a country that they don't recognize. So when I go and I look at things like or not even a country, like a civilization they don't recognize, like that is for sure an ongoing theme across all the Gridlink records. And I, not necessarily that even the other members of the band totally understood this. Like, I know Takafumi did because I talked with him about it a lot when we were writing the records. But like, the idea that the world has I don't know if it's irrevocably, but like there's a rejection of things that made the West, and the unwillingness to do the work to change it, for people to change things themselves. Instead, they want to hold a gun to other people's heads and force them to change, which is the least liberal Western idea I can imagine. So as somebody who, so you that's why I find it really interesting when people say that Coronet Juniper is a hopeful record. The last line of the record is resigned with bitterness, and it's the idea that there is a core of people that are still moving forward against an overwhelming collapse around them and still trying to hold things together and unwilling, like refusing under against all odds to stop, like willing to die and raise another generation of people who are willing to die to preserve what exists now and to try to make it better. Because with the internet and so many other things, like I've watched what was common sense in my lifetime turned into insanity, and just basic notions of like I'm not trying to explain the record for everybody, but I'm saying for me, like a lot like the ideas on Coronet Juniper I mean, I believe in a desert called peace, right? Like what was the Pink Floyd song? Like they made a desert and called it peace. Like the only way you could have peace is if you flatten everybody else who stands against you. That's the only true way to get peace, right? Like human civilizations by their very nature are rife with conflict and tension. And from the and I mean, my belief is that one of the reasons America has been such a successful country is that tension has produced an incredible amount of creativity over the past 50 years since World War II. Or I guess it's been 70 years since World War II, but really in the the latter half of the American century, 1945 to essentially 2001, like America was driving a lot of the innovations in the world. America was responsible for like the life that almost everybody enjoys today. Like you think about like the availability of goods, the availability of communications, the availability uh, of ways to learn never existed prior to the internet or prior to library systems or publication, like mass publication of works, right? The printing press came from Europe, obviously, but like the printing press became a much more, I mean, because of the nature of people coming to America, and immigrating, the printing press had far more reach of different ideas to different people than it ever could in Europe. Because like in Europe, like if somebody prints out like 100 flyers, they're going to give them to 100 people that are probably either going to think the same thing or something completely different. Like they're on one side or the other. But in America, you had like 50 different ideas competing with each other. So like those competing ideas can possibly learn from these other things, and maybe they're not going to accept them entirely. They're going to assimilate them into their version of however their neighborhood is run, right? Like it's very common, like in New York City in the old days, and Philadelphia now, and other cities, you'll have like Chinatown, Italy Town, like an area where a lot of the Mexican people live. A lot of people like different communities, Thai areas. Like when I lived in New York City, there was a whole area of the city that was just Thai people essentially, and then there were some Vietnamese people next to them, and next to them was the Jamaican people, and each neighborhood had its own kind of rhythm, right? Like there were different like restaurants. There was everybody was trying to make a better life for their kids. Like there are common themes, right? Like people who have children believe in the future, and they tend to want to build a better place for their kids to grow up. Whether it's like the chances they didn't have, like the guy who works at the convenience store and busts his ass so his kid can go to college and be like I don't know, engineer or doctor, like coming from Chinese family, first generation immigrants. Everybody wanted their kids to be doctors and engineers, right? They wanted like high money things, because these people, my I don't get along the best with my family, right? But like I still have a lot of respect for them. And my dad used to tell us about, like, in China, like they could afford to eat meat one time a year on the New Year, basically the Chinese New Year. That was it. Like they just ate vegetables and rice the rest of the year. Now I've actually been to the island where my dad came from. I went there in like 2002 or 2003, I forget. But they have one road on the island, and one paved road, and it's basically just wide enough for them to move carts of crops to the water where the ships come in to pick up the crops that they grow on the island. There's no electricity on the island. They have gas and propane for everything. There was like 3 actual houses on the island. Most of the people who live there still live in absolute poverty. They have maybe some linoleum tile on the floors. They have cinder block walls. Half of the places still only have like tin roofs, insulated tin roofs, where they'll like just stuff a bunch of insulation and tie it onto the tin and put it together. So like, you see poverty, like true poverty like that, and these people are happy. Like, like these kids were thrilled to meet me, like when I met them. And, even though I'm not directly related to them, they were just happy to see somebody, right? Like, cause it's somebody new. And like they had games they made with stuff they found on the island, the things that they could make themselves, right? Like the creativity that's needed. Like people in absolute squalor still find a way to enjoy life sometimes. And then I come to the West, like you come back from a place like that and you see people complaining about oh my God, I took out a $500,000 college loan and it was a huge mistake, and I've got a useless degree and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, that was your choice. Nobody put a gun to your head. I paid my way through college. Like, I mean, yes, college is much more expensive now, but the reality is that, like, hey, man, I worked my ass off. Like, my parents didn't believe in art school. Like, I saved my money. I had like 3 or 4 jobs in high school to save money to go to art school. And then when I got to college, I had a construction job that helped me pay my way through college. So I got through my 4 years of art school, and I had paid it all off as I went. It was really difficult. Um, but like what I got from college was critical thinking. Like I didn't necessarily get a specific skill other than critical thinking. And critical thinking was actually one of the most important things I could learn, because I no longer had to accept any idea. I could understand that, like, hey, I don't have to just accept an idea because it's in a book. I can actually think about it. I can contrast that with other ideas. So bringing that all back into Gridlink, Gridlink like thematically is about like challenging ideas based on my life experiences, right? Like the reason that no other band is going to write lyrics like Gridlink is because nobody else has my specific life experiences. And I think that I don't know if it's that people don't get the opportunity, they choose not to pursue the opportunities, or or really what the deal is. Because growing up, I had no anticipation that this was going to be my life. I knew I wanted to work in the arts. That's about all I knew. I had a very hard focus on doing that, and I liked music, so I wanted to be in a band. But everything else from there, it was following like my heart, following, like working hard for things that people didn't believe in to prove them wrong, when I believed in something. And like, and basically building like my whole life, like, like I had the good fortune to work in Europe for about 6 months to a year. So and I, you learn something when you live a place versus you just go through with your band or something. You actually learn what the rhythm of life is like, right? You see what people live like in different places, and you understand their different values. And like, okay, that's not for me necessarily. Like, I grew up with these values, so I want them, but I understand why things are here. It's like Japan. Like, I would never want to immigrate to Japan, but Japan is my favorite place in the world. Part of the reason it's the favorite place in the world is because it's so distinctly Japanese, and there's nothing else like it, right? Like, they've preserved their culture in a way that is unique. Like, there's a sense. I mean, I haven't been there in a couple of years, but like even pre-COVID, like there was still a sense of like national unity, that Japanese people were Japanese, and that they believed in their country, and they believed in their people, and they believed in their heritage for good and bad, right? Like, like, hey man, are they ashamed of some things in their history? Absolutely. Are they proud of some things in their history? Absolutely. That's perfectly normal, right? Like life is a nuanced thing. Nobody gets it right all the time, and like even the most ardent beliefs can be wrong. So Gridlink is what it is because I am taking that approach to songwriting. It's not about being right. It's not necessarily about all the things you've done wrong either, right? Like, that was the genius of Evangelion also. Evangelion is a sad story, but it's got a lot of ups and downs. Like, it's like the search for human connection, and like how people with the best intent can bounce off each other. These are really mature ideas and important things that I wish more people understood, rather than immediately having the expectation of like you have the expectation of immediate gratification. You have the expectation of success and happiness. You cannot be happy all the time. You cannot be successful all the time. And the road to success is not just paved with hard work to get to success. It's paved with failure, like debilitating, repeated failure. And you know, I mean, I'll pick like Coronet Juniper. The title track of the record is very much about being married. It's about like the difficulty of like being in a committed relationship with somebody that I care about deeply for almost. I'm coming up on my 20th year anniversary with my wife this year in terms of our relationship, and it has not always been easy, and it has not always been good. And it's funny, when I went into the studio, the last line of the song was originally going to be we let go, we still let go. But I was like, that's not right. We still hold on. Like, me and my wife are still together. We've been through so much hard shit, so many hard moments. But that's like, the fact is that we're still together and we want to be together. and it's work to be together, and it's hard, right? Like it's hard to be in a relationship with other people, and it like in many ways it's easier to be alone, and that's, but fundamentally, like as people, we're social animals and we yearn for connection, right? Like I think that's one of the hardest parts about music in general, is that like grindcore or like extreme music to me is the music of alienation, of isolation, of loneliness, and like we're yearning for this connection with other people, but like how do we express it? By pushing them away, right? Isn't that's like such a crazy idea, but it's the reality, right? Because there's like something inside of us that, like, I mean, it's in the hedgehog's dilemma in Evangelion, like you want people to be closer, but like the closer you get, the more scared you are, the more you want to push them away.
My favorite quote you said up to now is, success isn't just built on hard work, but also debilitating failure. I think that really encapsulates what Gridlink is about in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, dude, it's so difficult to, it's funny, it's so difficult to work with very talented people, because very talented people didn't accidentally get to be very talented. They had to work really hard to not only get to be that good at what they're doing, they have to work even harder to maintain it. Because that's the thing that like most people don't think about. It's not just about like getting good enough to do like I see this. I used to hear this a lot. Like how are you able to still do those vocals? Practicing. Yeah. Like, oh, you don't play a lot. That's why your voice is so good. When we're getting ready to do a Gridlink record, I will practice 1 to 2 times a week for about an hour, hour and a half at a stretch. It is extraordinarily difficult to do this kind of music and to be what's the word? It's extraordinarily difficult to do this kind of music and to maintain this kind of music, like to maintain the chops to do it. I don't care what you're doing. I mean, whether I like it or not doesn't even matter. It's very, very challenging. So, you look at Brian Fajardo. Brian Fajardo is a guy who is out there several days a week, banging on his drums for hours at a time to maintain his level of like, his proficiency with his chosen instrument. Takafumi is the same thing. That guy will practice himself into crippling, debilitating conditions with his hands. Like the sad part about Takafumi is he's so good because he goes that hard, but it's also going to be the thing that essentially ends his career earlier, because there's only so hard you can go for so long. It is something that I was personally worried about when we were doing Long Henna, is, well, how, like how is this affecting you? Like when we were recording Coronet Juniper, sorry, not Long Henna. When we were recording Coronet Juniper, there were multiple times where his hand would just cramp up to the point where he needed a break, and be like, okay, take a break, and then he would keep playing, and you would have to sit there and literally prevent him from putting his hands on his guitar to prevent him from working, because that's what it takes to be as good as he is, right? It's an actual physical commitment, and I mean, if you watch videos of him now, he's wearing a brace on his hand again, right? That's not an accident. That's how hard he is working to be as good as he is, and he's an old guy. It's taking a real toll on him, like that's why he's so good.
Yeah. All right. I think I have one final question for you.
Shoot.
Is grindcore officially dead? Because I genuinely believe that Coronet Juniper was the most beautiful funeral that grindcore could get. And what I mean by dead is that there are no possible innovations that could be done within that style. It's been completed.
I mean, I would never say that. I think there's always room for somebody to be very creative and come in and do something. I don't necessarily know what the next step is, but that's part of why I needed to, I need to step away from music right now. Like I've got other things I'm focused on, and I would not have wanted to do Coronet Juniper if it wasn't as good as it was. Like I don't want to just make records to make records. I'm, what? Again, can I imagine it right now? No. But if you asked 7-year-old me if it could get any heavier than AC/DC's Highway to Hell, I would have told you no. I actually, when I heard Highway to Hell, I was like, how is anybody going to get heavier and faster than this record? This is insane. And yeah, I was wrong. Right? Iron Maiden and Judas Priest proved me wrong pretty quickly after that. so like the limits of my imagination are just that, they're limitations. And I think there's always room for people to do something exceptional. Um, I'll say this, no matter how perfect you play something, that is not a guarantee that it will be good. Like pure skill, like being an engineer does not necessarily automatically equate to excellence, right? Like there's an engineering side, like a technical capability side that you need to be good to even be able to reach that point. And then there is a creative side that comes from, I think, maturity or naivety, depending on where you are in your life, where you sometimes get that one hit wonder. And like Repulsion's a great example, right? They tried to write some other material, and they understood after writing a couple of those catchy songs that, like, we are never going to reproduce the magic of Horrified, so why even try? And I'm like, oh, I got a lot of respect for you guys for actually being able to do that, right? Like to not be, not to bag on them or anything, but like not to not be Napalm Death. I mean, I don't know how many records Napalm Death has recorded since From Enslavement to Obliteration. And there was a short period of time where I remember when they first came to America, I was so excited. I saw them play a couple of times, and I was just very happy because I was like finally getting to see Napalm Death. And then, like, it wore off, man. Like by the time Fear, Emptiness, and Despair came out, I was like, this is just not the band. This is not the band that I want. This is not the band that I liked originally. Um, and they're doing their own thing now, and I need to move on. And I've never, no matter how many times people have told me that, oh, the new record Napalm is back, I'm like, well, how many times is Napalm going to be back? Like did they ever go away? And is like, if you like what they're doing, cool, but like it's not for me. Like it's like Immortal, right? Like Battles in the North was as good as that band ever got, and Blizzard Beast was okay. And yeah, do I enjoy some of the later records? Yeah, there's some good songs on some of the later records, but they basically sound like Metallica, Like Satyricon another band like that. Like I actually really enjoy Satyricon, but I have no illusions. They're basically just like a hard rock band, Like they have a slightly different vibe to them, but they're basically a hard rock band, And like black metal or whatever they call it, Like people really didn't like their last record. I really liked the last record. The one with the monk painting on the cover, Deep Darkness Upon the Deep, or Deepness Calls, or some shit like that. The one with the song about World War II. Oh God, I can't remember what it's called now. Fuck, man. I haven't listened to them in a while, but like again, a band that I have a lot of respect for. I'm like, okay, cool, they're doing their thing. Do I love the song King? No, I get why everybody loves the song King. But like there's always some place that somebody could go with something that I didn't expect that could be better than what I'm doing. I mean, is it possible to get more intense? Sure. I mean, I don't know. Like, what's the band called? I think Last Days of Humanity. I
Yeah.
never really listened to them. They're not my genre necessarily, but like they're so ridiculously fast. There's a hilarious overdub of one of their songs with Bert and Ernie playing like drums, and it's so fun for me to watch that. I don't know anything else about the band, but I'm like, man, it's just like so relentlessly fast. This song for like 2 minutes, and I'm like, yeah, I like that. Do I want to buy the record? Nah, it's not what I'm looking for, right? I'm glad that there are other people who are looking for it because it's so ridiculously extreme. I would have never come up with that record. I would have never even thought that was possible. Like by comparison, Gridlink is quite tame in terms of like the extremity compared to that band, because they're just like balls out. Like, I mean, that's like a machine gun for like 3 minutes. It's kind of amazing. But you know what? Hey man, I like the first couple of Def Heaven records. Like I like them a lot. And they did something with black metal that I didn't think was necessarily possible. And so yeah, there's always possibility to do something else, man. There's always a possibility. Somebody's got a different angle. Somebody's got a different like somebody hits a moment in their life where something clicks and they're able to like take their life's work and compile it into a single record or a single piece of music or song or a book or whatever, poem. Hey man, like there's always the possibility for that, and I would never discount it. I mean, like they're a great like Japanese hardcore band Systematic Death is, I believe they're still playing, and I haven't liked an American or Western like hardcore band since the 80s. But Systematic Death is fucking awesome. And they basically play what for me is like old like hardcore thrash. Like what they don't sound like DRI. They sound like 20 times better and more hard than DRI, and they're like 55 years old, you know? And they kick absolute ass. Like I've seen them live and they just destroy. They're like, I saw Gauze play once. Gauze was so goddamn good. And like, do they sound like their old records? No, they keep changing their sound. So there's always room. Yeah, there's always room for something, man. You'll always, and nothing is better than the surprise of getting something that's completely badass that you didn't see coming. Like that's like one of the best feelings in the world, to buy something and be like, holy shit, this is amazing. And then because then you want to tell everybody, right? And unfortunately now with social media, it's like I don't know how far people's influences anymore. Like when it started out and you would post like, oh, check out this new band, like people would actually look. Now it's like that's the wall of like, please support this, please support that. But like Maximum the Hormone is a band I had not really heard of until 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit less than that. And when I got into them, I was so into their catalog. And then I saw them live and I was like, holy shit, these guys could bring it live. They were so fucking good. I mean, one of the best concerts I've ever been to in my life. And I mean, I put them up there with like Slayer live in terms of the delivery live was incredible. So much energy.
Yeah, and they're so hyperactive, considering that, like they're getting up there in age nowadays. But like when I saw the stuff they're doing recently, it's like the music has not aged by a second.
Yeah, they're getting more intense, right? Like they're getting crazier with their stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, there's always the possibility for something new to happen. There's always, I mean, like the band Off came out. I mean, granted, that was one of the guys from Circle Jerks, and I think one or two other bands. That was the first really good punk thing I'd heard in years, right? Like I was so blown away. But then me and my wife saw Adrenaline OD play a couple of I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago. We saw them. They did a reunion show. Those dudes are like probably 10 years older than me, but they were like the New Jersey hardcore band for a long time. They're really fast, really funny, really catchy. And like live, they were fucking awesome. They were just really, really good. I mean, I could see them getting up there in age, but I remember those guys. I remember seeing them when they did their reunions 10 and 20 years ago too. Like, I'm like, yeah, man, they're grown up dudes. Like they have kids. The kids are in college, the kids have got their own lives now, and they're still able to get up there and kick ass. And I'm like, man, there's always the possibility for something special to happen. And then you get disappointments like Am I Morbid, which was like everybody could be kicked out of Morbid Angel. And it's like dog shit. And you're like, fuck, man. Like, this is like the worst of everything put into one record. My God, I wish. It's like Chicken Foot. Chicken Foot was terrible. It's like, oh my God, how did you take Steve Vai and make him make a record that sounds this bad? Holy shit.
I need a job.
Oh my God, dude. I wanted to like I don't like Sammy Hagar that much. Like I really didn't like what he did to Van Halen. But like, I mean, hey man, preference is everything. They sold way more records with Sammy Hagar than David Lee Roth, like, and I'm sure, and again, personalities being what they were, I'm sure David Lee Roth was hardly an easy guy to work with in the 80s when he was like the rock star,
Yeah.
People make mistakes and they learn, and then maybe they come back together later in their lives for one last go, and then there's the Police, right? I really hope the Police never do anything ever again together, because like they were a great band. And I'm so happy they're not together anymore, because those guys like clearly hate each other's guts. Well, now we're talking about the Police and your response to your grindcore question. So I'm pretty sure I've more than answered this at this point.
Yeah, it's been great. Any final statements?
Statements. I mean, not really statements. I mean, I know. I mean, I could say at least for the musical side, Dave Whitty obviously has a number of bands that he's pursuing, aside from Municipal Waste. I believe he's actually trying to do something fast again too. He was talking to me and Rob about like trying to get his blast beat chops up again. Rob Martin is, for all intents and purposes, still retired to the best of my knowledge. I mean, he's writing new material, but who knows if he's ever going to release it. There is no Discordance Access reunion going to happen almost ever. I can't imagine a situation which it would happen. Hayaino Daisuki was, a great project. We are not bringing that back either. We are not bringing grid, or at least I am not. I have no plans to come back and do any more Gridlink material. I feel like the work is complete. And for me as a vocalist, I think I've kind of reached the peak of what I can do at my age. And I don't really necessarily have a whole lot new to say. But you know what? Hey, when I didn't plan to write Long Henna, or not Long Henna. I didn't have Coronet Juniper sitting around until I started getting like songs, right? Like I didn't have anything written for that record. It wasn't like I had like a bank of lyrics that I'd been sitting on for 5 years waiting for this moment. So I guess you should never say never, but like I don't think there's any plans to reform Gridlink, and there are no plans to perform with Gridlink again, and there are no plans to record with Gridlink again. I have graphic novels I write, Black Powder Red Earth. It's also a tabletop war game. That's something that I've been also passionate about since I was in high school, like since Warhammer 40K and Space Hulk days. But it is a modern warfare style comic book. Probably not going to be of interest to most music fans because it is a war storybook. It is not like anything touchy feely. It's pretty dark. And then I have a clothing collection I make now called the Dread and Fear of Kings, which is, I got sick of complaining about how you couldn't buy anything that was not made without slave labor. So I actually made a collection of clothing that doesn't in any way touch forced labor anywhere in the world, and that was extremely difficult to do. It is not for everybody. It is definitely some pricey stuff, but and it's what I was saying earlier. Like if you're not happy about something, you got to at least try to make the changes possible so that the opportunities are there for if like people don't want to buy stuff made in concentration camps. There's an actual alternative, because if nobody spends their money, if nobody like votes with their wallet, nothing ever changes. And I don't like the idea that like all clothing is made of plastic. I don't like the it's a whole I had a whole bunch of personal reasons for wanting to launch a clothing collection. But that pretty much takes up most of my time now. That and some of my other like client facing work that I do for my company Echelon, which is not the Jocko company. I didn't know Jocko had a company called Echelon till like a year ago. But I thought that was funny because I picked up one of his soft drinks and I was like, oh, Echelon, that's interesting.